I heard someone's watching this from a pub today. That's kind of fun. I hope you have a drink for me. Hi, I'm Casey Watts. I'm on the ecosystem team. I joined Heroku about a year ago. I used to study neurobiology at Yale University. I published in a few papers. It's about not just genetics, but epigenetics, and how modifications to epigenetic things in a specific part of the brain, the lateral amygdala, they modify consolidation of fear memory. And I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Feel free to talk about this with me later if you want. Today we're going to talk about these two topics. The first part's about cognitive restructuring, and the second part's about psychological safety. Yeah. Hold it. Sure. Yeah, I want it to be heard too. Oh, I feel more powerful now, the echo in the room. You can definitely hear me better. Good. Cool, so our talk's going to be on these two parts. The first part is basically about you, your brain, the solo individual person sitting there. The second part is about psychological safety, which is about like team dynamics. So you can manipulate your own mind and other people's minds by the end of this talk. I hope you use this power for good. All right, part one, you. We're going through these 5 parts. First, I want to give you some neurobiology, psychology background. Ledoux's dual pathway, this is the way I like to split the brain in half. I don't like to do it down the middle. The left hemisphere, right hemisphere is not so useful for most things. But the inner versus the outer brain is. I'll illustrate through this cute cat video. Oh, PDFs don't play GIFs. Poor GoToMeeting. I'm sorry. Spoiler alert, the cat notices the cucumber. The cat jumps. It's so afraid. Oh no, what is this? And then it realizes it's just a cucumber. This is parallel to the 2 pathways of the brain. By the way, if you haven't seen that GIF itself, I really recommend it. It's so good. But it's kind of sad. I feel bad for the cat. It was really scared. So there are 2 parts of the brain, the inner brain and the outer brain. The inner brain we call the low road, sort of. You can see the diagram there. It's a really short arrow on the left side. Different from the high road that goes around the outside of the brain. The left one, the inner brain is much faster, and it processes things like a fear response, whereas the outer brain processes your actual thoughts, like the words that you're thinking in your mind all the time that you think of as your brain. So this is true in a lot of animals and definitely humans, the inner brain versus the outer brain. Emotions versus feelings. Feelings, emotions versus thoughts. All right, a lot of us here are engineers or have engineering-related backgrounds. This is the system diagram for an engineer. A system has an input, it processes something, has an output, and then the most important part, the thing that makes the systems work well, is the feedback loop. The prototypical example is often a thermostat. So it gets hotter. Oh, it feedbacks. It makes it colder in the room. Or if it gets colder, it makes it hotter. You set it to a temperature, and then it feedbacks to itself to set the temperature of the room. The feedback loop, I think, is the most important part, and we'll be talking about this. On the left is a simple diagram of basically how animals react to the world, so we think. We think animals don't think the way humans do. And it's also how humans act in a stressful situation and how most of us act when we're on autopilot. On the right, there's a little spot in the middle. The process part in the middle is where we actually think thoughts and can control our behavior. A lot of the talk is about that middle part there. But let's start by talking about the inputs. If you can notice what inputs affect how your brain works, you can kind of control them too. Inputs that affect this process of how you react to the world include stimuli from the environment, like things that happen, actions, stuff you have to do at work, interactions with other people. Your mind also makes spontaneous thoughts and emotions, definitely. You can influence them. You can think your own thoughts deliberately, and then sometimes make yourself feel emotions deliberately. But a lot of the time, it's just automatic, spontaneous thoughts and emotions. And my favorite one is your bodily state, epitomized by this word, hangry, one of my favorite. I'm so glad this is in our vocabulary now because it helps people understand that your state can totally affect the way you think and feel and react. Let's take a look at what happens when things go wrong. Downward spiral is when you have some negative feelings that lead to negative thoughts, and it loops around to itself, and then you feel worse and worse and worse, and often this leads to you not reacting to things around you as well as you should. If this happens at work in a meeting and you feel terrible and then you feel worse and you think thoughts, you're not going to respond as well or effectively to the people around you to get your point across. You're just going to be upset and frustrated and express that, which can be evolutionary useful, sure, but I want you to be able to be in control of when you do this or not. usually you want to be in control. For a more specific example, if you notice something's going on, you judge it bad, and you decide to feel bad about it, then you might decide to judge it again, and you just go through this judgment spiral. Let's figure out how to not do that. How do we fix it? The answer is the topic of this talk, CBT. I'll tell you about CBT, the background of it, and then we'll get into how we're going to do it to ourselves. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It's a therapy designed to treat mental illnesses, in particular depression. It's a talk therapy, so you go into an office with a therapist, and then they talk to you in certain ways, challenge you to think in certain ways, react to your emotions, notice your emotions. CBT is as effective as antidepressant drugs for treating depression. As effective, meaning if you did one or the other, you'd have the same impact on how you're dealing with depression, how you're interacting with the world. Although both is better. If you have both at the same time, you'll get through the depressive episode or whatever. You'll deal with it better and faster. But anyway, I just want to point out it's so powerful. CBT is so powerful. It's literally as good as drugs for a mental illness. But since everybody can benefit from understanding their thoughts and emotions better, I think I'd like to call it training instead of therapy. You all, maybe therapy would be useful. It's useful for most people, probably. But training is a lot more approachable term. We can all use training. Yeah, we'll agree with that word. It's much more approachable. So how do we CBT? Pull out your terminal. npm install constant introspection. It's a debugging tool. Just kidding, it's not real. Everything's on npm, though. You know, we should make it. If you want to help me make this tool, let's talk. So we talked about this a little bit. There's automatic thoughts and feelings, and then there's deliberate thoughts and feelings. And the point of this is to get you to be more deliberate about all these things. I'll go through some specific techniques, how you can notice what inputs are affecting you, and how you can notice your emotions and thoughts and then control them. Inputs. Whoop! That's the sound I make to my mom when she's upset and yelling at the kids. Often she's upset because she hasn't eaten, or she's hungry, or she's in pain because she's been working too hard. And when I say whoop to her, she ends up thinking about it for a moment. Am I really upset that Casey took 3 more seconds to close the door than I wanted, or am I just an upset person right now in general? She'll often realize she hasn't eaten, or she's stressed, or any of those other things. And just saying whoop to her, since we talked about it already, she understands what whoop means. It means, Mom, can you check yourself, please? And then she checks all of her inputs and everything. It's really effective. She loves it. She whoops herself. I'd like to say this puts her into the whoop state. The whoop state is where you're going to pause for a second, not respond to the world, and just think about what's going on in your mind. I'm so proud of her. She's great. When you notice yourself about to respond automatically and you'd like to take a moment and think about it, I'd like you to congratulate yourself. You can whoop, and that's kind of a congratulation moment on its own. It feels really satisfying to say, but I want you to say, good job, me. I noticed that I'm in a state, or that I noticed I'm having these automatic thoughts or feelings. All right, cool. So let's say you can get into the whoop state. You can reliably get there, but what do you do once you're there? How do you even deal with the thoughts and emotions? We'll start with the emotions. One technique is to expand your emotional vocabulary. This can help by reading. Fiction is actually really good at teaching people to deal with emotions better, because fiction puts you into someone else's mind. You can imagine yourself as a writer and also expand your vocabulary in emails to each other or on Slack. If you'd like, you can print this out. This is in the notes that I'll send it to you at the end. Processing techniques, 2 more are writing things out and talking to someone else. So if you have a stressful event that happens to you and you want to talk about it, you can just write. I like to open a Gmail draft to myself because it's just really easy. It's quicker to open than Google Docs, and I can just type all my thoughts out and then delete it. And in the process, I've come up with all these words that I can use to describe the situation. Talking to other people is also super effective, and if you don't have someone you can reliably go to talk about stressful things, you should make it a high priority in your life to find someone that can do that for you. Also, a lot of your friends could probably really use this type of emotional support too. Someone to just process their emotions too. So if you reach out to someone who might need help, like literally anyone, they might reach back to you, and you could mutually support each other through this and get better at processing emotions. I'd like you to view emotions as data when you're in the whoop state. So that is non-judgmentally. If you have an emotion, that's a data point you can accept. It's totally okay that you have this emotion because clearly you do and you need to know it. So then once we have the data, we can process the thoughts. Here's a list of 10 maladaptive cognitions, or unhelpful thinking patterns. And I'd like you, if there's only one thing you take away from this, is to print this list and get used to these terms and notice when you do these maladaptive techniques. I'll go through an example now. So let's say this happened a couple months ago. I'm going to a meetup. I'm already hangry, and I know it. I'm so hungry I missed dinner. There's pizza there, maybe. It's wet. It's raining. I stepped in a puddle. My shoe is soaked. I'm kind of upset. Wet shoes are the worst, I say to myself. Okay, obviously I'm exaggerating, but in this case it's not that helpful because it makes me feel worse. I'd call this magnification. Not only are wet shoes uncomfortable and bad, they're the worst possible feeling. Like I'm making myself feel worse about the situation by communicating to myself in this way, thinking these thoughts. Another one. If I'm late, I should just not go. I'm already upset. Why should I even go to this meetup? That's kind of like all or nothing thinking. Is it okay if I show up late? Actually, yes, it was fine. It was so fine. Nobody minded. Today sucks. I heard myself think this thought, and I was like, Casey, that is not accurate. And this is even 3 of them. I was overgeneralizing the entire day. I was jumping to a conclusion that since it's been bad so far recently, since I stepped in the puddle, it's going to be bad the rest of the day. That's fortune telling. I was disqualifying the positive stuff that happened all day before that, and I was just like, nah! Today sucks. I could have thought some different thoughts. If I wanted to be more accurate and more mindful about it, I could have... I'm not upset that I thought these, but I can then additionally think these other thoughts that are kind of corrective. They're really accurate. I'm feeling frustrated. My foot is wet, and that is uncomfortable. I'm really hangry right now, but it'll go away when I eat. I'll be more comfortable when I sit down. I'll feel great when I dry my shoes off. So I'm just trying to think positive thoughts. When I get to the meetup, I'm going to feel better. I went to the meetup, and it was great. My feet dried. I didn't even have to take my shoes off. I would have been a little embarrassed taking the shoes off, but I would have done it if I would have been much happier. So print this, please. Or at least save the PDF to your desktop. Cool. So if you can notice your inputs, you can process your emotions more skillfully and process your thoughts more critically. Now you're ready to choose your response to the situation a lot more deliberately. That's the core of it. If you'd like to read deeper into this, I recommend the web app Joyable, and particularly for people who have social anxiety, or you think that you are anxious around people sometimes, then this app might help you do that. They have a lot of specific techniques for going into a social situation that's awkward and dealing with it really well, and countering your automatic thoughts that are probably not true, and thinking about more accurate, better ones. I have a friend who's done Joyable, and it's been so good for her. She's more ready to go to parties and interact with humans at meetups and all this, and it's been wonderful. It's so great. Therapist would be the best way to get CBT done, because they're the people who proctor it to people who do that. If you don't want to see a therapist, there's also books about it. I've linked one in the notes. It's really, really fun, interesting. The examples are, they're great. I love this book. This is part 1. What questions do you guys have about emotion in the brain in general, or cognitive behavioral therapy, or what we just covered? Also, any questions from online? All right, sweet. We'll move on. The next section is about your team. It's about psychological safety. First, I want to distinguish a psych-safe group is different from a safe space. A safe space is one where anybody can attend and they will not be made to feel bad based on attributes of their person, especially protected classes. That's a really strict definition. I like safe spaces. I want to be in them generally. But a psych-safe group is different from that. It's less strict. A psych-safe group is one where there's a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So that can be true even if people are really judgmental on non-team members, but if they just like each other plenty, they can work effectively as a team. Amy Edmondson is a researcher who spearheaded a lot of this research into psychological safety. I think a lot of Heroku are aware of this term because we've had the articles sent around a few times. So I'll summarize the article for anyone who's forgotten or didn't read it. What makes some teams perform better as teams than others? Google did some research into this. Well, it's not personality type, skills, backgrounds, or management style, surprisingly. It's really about the group norms. So we'll go through some psych-safe team attributes. There's 2 in particular. If your team has these 2 traits, it's probably a more effective team. If your team, the term they used was conversational turn-taking. If everyone on the team tends to talk about an equal amount throughout the day, just in general, they all contribute, nobody's being super quiet, silent, that would be a sign that they're not comfortable expressing themselves, maybe. But if everyone's contributing, that's a good sign that it's a psych-safe team. But the other one is average social sensitivity, which is kind of like empathy. But anyway, there are some specific tests you can do, like one I might show at the end. We'll go through a bunch of ways to improve how your team does these. If you need more motivation, a psych-safe team will generally have a higher collective IQ, which isn't something you can directly measure, but that makes sense. If one person's literally not contributing because they're afraid of getting reprimanded for it or being teased for a bad idea, they're not contributing, so IQ is not going to add to the pool of all the IQs. So if you want your team to have a higher IQ, everyone just has to feel free to contribute somehow. So how do we do it? I broke it down into these 10 things. Let's go through conversational turn-taking related ones first. This is one of my favorite psychology terms. I especially notice it in tech a lot. The unearned dogmatism effect is the phenomenon where you feel like you are very experienced, therefore whatever you think about the situation is the right thing. You know that there are bad alternatives, like obvious bad alternative 1 and 2, and they're terrible. Mine is the best option. It's the best. And, oh, someone else thinks that option 3 is better? They're wrong. They're wrong because 1's the best. That's mine. Anyway, it's like closed-mindedness. It's being dogmatic because of your experience. I would use the word dogma to describe it in a good way. 2 plus 2 is 4. I will be dogmatic about that. No, 2 plus 2 is definitely 4. Don't argue with me. But it becomes less useful the more complex the system gets, which is what happens in tech more often. The tincture for this, the solution, if you encounter someone who's being dogmatic, is often to help them understand they're missing information. There's something you know that makes your idea look valuable that they don't know. Or vice versa, and you could learn what they're thinking about it. But as long as someone thinks they know all the information, they're going to remain dogmatic about the situation. Oops. So now you have the answer. You're missing some information. Would you like to talk about it? Another technique is called framing. So let's say you're working on a project and something goes wrong. You learned something about that, or about the code, or about whatever you're working on in that situation. You could frame it positively instead of negatively, like, you made a mistake, you are bad. Say, you learned something about this complex situation. This one is super related to acknowledging your own fallibility. So, no, sorry, I should reorder these. That was super related to declaring unknowns. So ahead of time, you could say, I know that this might be a problem. I don't know if this is going to be an issue at all. I haven't even looked at it. And developers are pretty good at that with project planning. We often have a section where we declare unknowns. And I think that's super useful. So that was related to framing. So we can frame it as a learning opportunity when we discover those unknowns along the way. Another one is acknowledging your own fallibility. So when you're working on a project, tell the team, I don't know everything. Please tell me the things that you know that I don't know. I might miss something. I need to hear from you. Tell me, even if you're not sure if I know it or not, you can just tell me. I'll appreciate that you're giving me input. That's great. Like in opening communication, making people feel more comfortable communicating is the point of this half of psych-safety, conversational turn-taking. Another thing you can do that helps other people is to ask questions about what they're doing, modeling curiosity. The more questions you ask, the more questions other people in your team ask. The more questions get asked, the more communication happens between people, the higher IQ the group has. Congratulations. So ask more questions. And we just covered that. Cool, so that's those 5. The other half of the coin is empathy. So decreasing riskiness on the team. This is another one of my favorite psychology terms, propinquity. As a mnemonic, I like to sing the song, Propinquity in the Brain, from that cartoon. Oh yeah. Propinquity is social closeness. Some of the first studies were done on college campus and dorms, so you'd have high propinquity to your roommate, maybe higher propinquity to your next door neighbor than the person down the hall. But if you have classes with people, you'll have higher propinquity with those people you sit around. Anyway, the more often you naturally interact with people, the higher propinquity you have with them. It's interesting because we don't naturally just see the people if you don't live in the main office, the main headquarters. Then there are some techniques we do sometimes. We have a lounge room. We have some special topic rooms like Fluffy Chat, my favorite. And we can go there and talk in a smaller group, and there's high propinquity. I have high propinquity with anyone in Fluffy Chat than people not in Fluffy Chat because we're more likely to interact there. I'm also really into this room that just happened recently called Coffee Break. If you're not in it yet, I might suggest you join it. There's a Google Hangouts chat room link at the top, and you can just hop in and see if anyone's there. If you just want to talk to someone about an idea, or you just need to take a break, talk to some humans. This reduces propinquity too for anyone who's involved. They are now closer. The more close we can be to our coworkers, the more empathetic we will be willing to be to those people. It's good to know your coworkers. On a deeper level, the more vulnerable you are with people in general, the closer you'll feel to them, the more you'll trust them. If you can be vulnerable around someone and they don't hurt you about it, if they make you feel better because they're comforting, you will trust them more, and that's really intimate. It's tricky to tell people you should let yourself be vulnerable at work because obviously there are more barriers than in personal life. But if you can be some amount more vulnerable, it's probably good for you in your relationships. Oh, sorry. By the way, there's also a lot of research into vulnerability that I've linked to in my notes that you might want to look at. This goes a lot deeper than I'm going to touch today. The term validation, you probably hear and use a lot. Let me give you a specific definition that I find to be really useful. Validation is the recognition and acceptance of another person's thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors as understandable, whether or not you agree. You can totally validate someone you completely disagree with, saying, well, if I thought that were the highest priority, I guess I would agree with you, but I don't. But you could say it better than that. If you validate someone, then they'll feel much more willing to continue discussing it with you. They feel like you're actually trying to understand them a little bit. Some research has been done, and a researcher has declared there are 6 levels of validation. There's a link in the notes to the researcher and an article about it that goes into more depth. Just briefly, imagine your friend's grandmother just passed away. The easiest thing you can do is just to be around them. If they're present around humans, they'll feel a little validated just by that baseline level. If they tell you something about how they're feeling, I feel really sad, I really miss her already, and then you can reflect that back to them. They feel like you were listening, which is pretty good. That's another level up. That's even better. If you can read their mind, if they're just being quiet, but you know they probably feel very sad, you say, you must be so upset right now and not know what to do. And if you can read their mind, that's another level. That's even better. They'll feel more validated by that. And a couple more. I want to go through them, but I'm short on time. The most radical one you could do, that's number 6. The most powerful one is if your grandmother recently passed away and you can really deeply relate to how they probably feel. Like, if someone who just experienced that can probably relate to it much better than someone imagining. And people will notice that and appreciate that a lot if you share that experience. 5 and 6, I'm surprised that anyone would is better, more powerful than based on the background. So let's say you're afraid of spiders and there was a spider in your chair. Anyone's afraid of spiders, really. So if you say that that's a normal thing, they'll feel more validated than, well, you are afraid of spiders. But that's still pretty good. I know you're afraid of spiders. Of course you jumped that there was a spider on the chair. So anyway, these are levels. Often, since reading this article, I find myself doing a lower one, and I consider doing a higher one. And it's better when I do it, and I try it. People like it better. And I was like, wow, I should continue thinking about this. I started saying anyone would a lot more, and people have responded really positively to that. My next technique is depersonalizing ideas. So every time I suggest an idea in a meeting, people tend to latch on. They say, oh, well, Casey's idea, blah, 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 but Matt's idea, blah, 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 and we talk about it as if it's mine. But really, it was just, I'm not attached to this idea at all. I just offered it. It's a possibility I thought of. I don't care if it succeeds or not. I want to talk about it, but I don't want to attach my name to it, my ego to it. I don't want to defend it because it's mine. I don't want people to be afraid to tell me that the idea is bad because it's mine. So depersonalizing it helps a lot. I like to just give ideas a more specific label, like describing it, or maybe just ABC if I don't have an alternative. And that removes a lot of the ego from discussions about ideas. This is a super concrete, very actionable one you can do. Next time you hear a person's name idea, say, no, hold on. It's really hard. People really want to just describe it the easiest way possible by Casey's idea. But I think not doing that is really powerful. Give it a shot. Any conversation you have with anyone ever, there are two channels you're communicating on. Developers tend to think on the task channel, the content. I want to tell you that this fact. And some people who are less empathetic tend to ignore the relationship channel completely. So you might say fact. Your idea might not work for this reason, and it's bad for this reason, and it's terrible. And then the person might hear, you're a bad developer. Or like they can personalize a lot of that. Like, this idea is bad, therefore you're bad. It's kind of implied. Unless you counter it by saying, you are great, I respect you a lot, you're wonderful, you have really good ideas, this one makes sense, I'm sure based on something I don't know that you're thinking of, but you might want this information, here's some information. Then they don't feel damaged at all, they feel like supported, uplifted, like that's great. So don't forget to communicate on both channels, like literally all day, every day. And if someone becomes defensive when you're talking to them, you might have skipped talking on the relationship channel first. You can maybe back up and say, hold on. You are great. This idea is what sucks. Maybe for this reason. And more nuance is probably better there too. This is linked to in the notes too. Here are 6 different ways you can convey information on the relationship channel: partnership, empathy, acknowledgement, respect, legitimation, and support. I want to go through the examples, but we're short on time. This is more homework for you. Read this article later. Cool. So that's the 5 and the 5 for techniques for increasing psych safety on your team. What questions do you guys have? Yes. Oh, microphone.
About the depersonalization of ideas. So as a manager, I want to usually make sure I'm given attribution where ideas are coming from. Do you have any suggestions or tips on striking the balance between depersonalizing but also making sure that you're not like have the appearance of, oh, I'm not giving attribution where it's coming from, so it might have the optics of like me trying to take on that idea as my own?
I think you can say it in neutral terms while you're in the middle of the process. Well, first let me say, hold on. After the fact, when the idea is known to be good, then totally give credit where it's due. People like that a lot. People only don't like it when it's a threat, like it might not go well. Along the way, you can probably do it in a neutral way, saying, well, idea A, which this person contributed to a lot of information and they thought about this a lot. Just saying that they thought about it a lot is pretty good and powerful. I feel like that's a lot of what people want. I don't know, if someone's really personal about it, if they want to be attached to this idea, I guess don't fight them on it, but often people want to talk about it on a level playing field, so they won't mind, at least early in the process, depersonalizing it. I guess the answer with everything is results may vary, depends on the context. Be careful. But this is a technique now I hope you think about at least sometimes.
Okay, my question is, so most of these things relate to how we can personally do better. If we are hitting some of these issues with other team members or people that we work with, how is the best way to get them involved in trying to understand your thought process through these things?
I'm so glad you asked that question. That gets asked every time, and if it doesn't, I'm a little disappointed. First of all, you have control over your own mind, not anyone else's mind. So this is probably where you have the most influence is yourself. That's why I'm focusing there. You can influence other people. You can help give them information they don't have. For example, sending them a link to an article from my notes maybe or something else you found. Making them watch this talk might be effective. Oh, yeah. But you can't just make someone do these things the right way. I really like the techniques that were in here that are an action you can do that influence the group norms, like modeling curiosity, asking questions more often, or telling people you don't know everything, like things that you can do to yourself. And that'll influence the team. It'll influence members in your team, but it won't, especially the most problematic people that don't do a lot of empathy or they don't communicate so freely, let people feel free to communicate. They're harder to get through to. I don't know. We might be stuck.
This is Tim. I'm out in Portland. I kind of had a question related to one that Chris said, which is sort of there's a thing that I've kind of noticed in our team, where like there's that balance of having an owner for actually getting something done, versus kind of what you were saying, like someone actually owning it and that kind of being a negative thing. So my question was really like, is there a way to frame the idea of having someone responsible versus like everyone else sort of feeling like that's the person that kind of has all the ideas, because like that's a challenge for us at least.
So let me say it back to you to make sure I hear this properly. It's you're finding difficulty distinguishing between someone responsible and someone who responsible for getting it done at all based on input from other people probably versus responsible for getting it all done themselves. Is that a distinguish?
Yeah, I guess like, like an example might be, hey, person A is responsible for getting it done, so maybe I don't feel comfortable giving input, or the inverse of like the person doesn't maybe ask for help because it's their problem to ship. Whereas like, that sort of challenge.
Based on the challenges you just said, it sounds like you already have a solution for each too, is to suggest or get the person to ask more questions or get the team to give more input, make people feel more comfortable. But I mean, if they're not comfortable, they're not going to do it. That's kind of the point, the core of psych safety. I don't know, this is a challenge, I'm with you.
Right. Okay.
I think a lot of these techniques can help some, but there's no silver bullet magic way to get them to just communicate clearly. You can't just make it happen immediately. Sorry, that wasn't the most uplifting answer, I guess. Saying it depends. Yeah, more questions? Cool, this was fun. I also have some bonus content if we have time. Oh boy. Good. Yeah. So this would be the end, but it's not. Bonus content's here. So you might ask, why doesn't everyone just do CBT, the first half of the talk that I've been talking about? Well, it's a skill. You have to learn to do it. It's not really that natural to do. Humans, I think a more natural state for humans is like the animal state, like just autopilot everything. So it takes effort to use your prefrontal cortex and think really hard. So it takes skill building. It takes a lot of time and energy, and it's uncomfortable to do, to confront your emotions and to think about your thoughts in a meta way. It's like, I don't know, it takes effort and work and energy, and that's why not everyone does it all the time. We don't even know we can do it, a lot of people. But you can power through it, especially now that you know it's possible and it's probably beneficial in most situations. I believe in you. Jonathan Haidt is a psychology researcher whose work I admire. It's really relevant to this too. Your mind is an elephant and an elephant rider, both. This duality. This is kind of the inner brain versus outer brain dichotomy again. So people in general, okay, which one is in charge of your brain? Your gut emotions or your thinking part of the brain? We want to believe it's the thinking part of the brain, but a lot of research suggests it's not. The emotional part of the brain is the one that is in charge. It decides what we do, and then after the fact, the rider, the verbal part of the brain, justifies what we're doing. Oh, what I'm doing makes sense for reasons and reasons. Believe me, it's very, very logical. I'm quite logical. So the elephant moves towards food when it's hungry. The rider says, oh, I'm very hungry. It smells the food and walks away and says, oh, I wasn't that hungry. Nope, I just had to go over here to this thing. It was very important. I don't know. The rider, just after the fact, making up reasons why we do the things. The rider can influence the elephant, definitely, and that's what we're trying to train ourselves to do more, is to be more influential to ourselves. But the elephant's really in charge. A term for what the elephant rider does is post hoc rationalization. Post hoc means after the fact. So after you already do something, you try to rationalize it. I came back in the room because I forgot this water bottle. Bye. And I don't know. Like, you can make up something out of the fact that was totally bogus, and it sounds okay to yourself. You know you've done this before. Come up with a reason after the fact. It happens like all day, every day to all of us. Yeah. So that's just interesting, I guess. There's no action to take here, except be aware of yourself. Oh, another one is, hold on. People do this all the time. Try to be less frustrated with them when they do this and give you a terrible reason for the thing, because there's probably a good reason they haven't thought of yet. If you need to know the reason, you can question them further and get them to think more critically, but often they just want to move on with their lives and just, okay, that was a bad reason, but I'm sure you have a better reason in there somewhere. They just haven't thought about it yet. So try to be patient with people. That's the takeaway. Also, if you want to communicate to someone and get them to be on your side, you need to learn to talk to their elephant more than their rider. So figure out what really motivates them and what emotions they have about the related things and try to speak to that. Republicans and conservatives in general are really good at talking to elephants, and liberals are more good at talking to riders. Guess which one's more effective? This brings us to Haidt's moral foundations theory. So there are 6 moral foundations, which is like a system of the brain, sort of like a thinking pattern that helps us make moral decisions. Liberals are really into these two on the left, care, harm, and liberty, oppression. And we're really not into the ones on the right. Those, the lines are so thin. Like, we care about them, sure. Everybody cares about all six some amount, but compared to conservatives, who equally care about all six, really. Liberals love to make arguments based on the left two, and they ignore the right four. And if a liberal were to make an argument based on the right four, and studies have shown this pretty well too, it would convince a conservative person a lot more effectively if they used all six. Actually, presidential campaigns, as of like 10-ish years ago, I forget which president, started enlisting psychologists to help them figure out why their messages weren't getting across to some segments of the population. And this was kind of the advice. So you need to speak to these other moral foundations. I want to give you examples, but I don't want to run into time too much. So read about this later if you'd like. I don't think I have a link to this in my notes, but I should add it. Please ping me if I don't and you're interested. Oh, and libertarians. It's even more different. They really care about liberty. Surprise. Cool. This is a quote that I really like that kind of epitomizes the first half of the talk. Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist who started a lot of therapies, and that's what this quote's for. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and our response lies our growth and freedom. That's beautiful. That gets right to the point. The space is the whoop space. He's describing the whoop space. I think the definition for anxiety is really useful. The key part of anxiety that I always forget and that really means a lot to me now is an uncertain outcome. People are anxious about things that they don't know what the outcome will be of. And anxiety makes you focus on that more, so you can try to predict what might go wrong to avoid that, or predict what will go correctly to anticipate that positively. But that second one is less useful. Avoiding what could go wrong is really useful, and that's why anxiety is a thing. Sometimes it goes overboard, and you ruminate instead. Rumination is another really useful word. Rumination is when you're focused on the causes and consequences of something that stresses you out, as opposed to the solutions. So you're focused on the negative. What could go wrong? Ah, this is terrible. It makes a downward spiral. Rumination causes a downward spiral. So if you find yourself really stressed and thinking is making it worse because you're only focusing on the negatives, you might be able to whoop space yourself and think about some positives instead to balance it out a little bit, save yourself from the downward spiral, and CBT yourself to happiness. Or at least like a more productive mindset to make better actions toward this situation. I told you about joyful plenty. Here, if you want to test your own empathy, this is a correlate to empathy. If you can read the emotions in these eyes very accurately, that means you're very empathetic. It's a really hard test. They made it to be really difficult on purpose so that it would accurately tell us about people. What's that top one? I think it's playful, but I haven't taken the test in a while. When I took it, I was disappointed in my score. It was lower than I thought. But it said it was above average still. Just this is a really difficult test. I think it's fun to take. Cool. That's my last bonus content. Whew. Thank you, everyone.
Is there anyone else online that has anything? You guys good? Awesome. Thank you so much,
Cool.
Casey.
So I'll send out the link to the notes, and I hope you all check it out. It's caseywatts.com/mind manipulation. The slides are linked to at the top of the notes. Totally. Yep. Yeah, thank you, everyone.